Good evening. My name is Kevin Butterfield. I'm the director of the John W. Kluge Center at the Library of Congress. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce today's speakers. The Kluge Center is one of the sponsors of this year's festival, and we're proud to help bring writers to discuss important and fascinating issues, parts of the national dialogue at the National Book Festival. Our next event features the book Afro Chic, Celebrating the Black Family Home, features Jeannine Hayes and Brian Mason. Jeannine is an accomplished writer, interior and product designer, and together with her husband Brian is the founder and creative director of the brand Afro Chic. Brian is also a co-founder and editor-in-chief of Afro Chic magazine. Moderator Robin Givhan is a Pulitzer Prize-winning senior critic at large for the Washington Post with a focus on politics, race, and the arts. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you all so much for being here, and I'm really excited to talk to Brian and Jeannine because I am a secret interior obsessive. So this brings me great joy. I'm really curious about the seeds of the book because you're an academic and you're a lawyer. I know there are so many unhappy lawyers, but how did you get into the world of interiors?
Yeah, I think I was one of those unhappy lawyers, definitely. For me, design has just always been a language. It's something I've always been attracted to, even as a child. My very first design project was actually my mom saying that I could decorate my room the way I wanted to when I was 6 years old. I remember that room. I decided I wanted to do it all pink and have strawberry shortcake curtains, and she took me to the fabric store.
Please tell me shag carpeting was involved.
I think there might have been some sort of, like, it was the 80s. So, you know, and to me it was like this amazing moment that I could construct something that represented myself. And from that age, it was always for me, design was just this place to be, a place of narrative, of storytelling, telling my own story in my room in one way or another. And it just kind of continued. So I did go into policy. I used to work in DC and then in California working on legislation. But even after work, I was always just playing with design ideas. And eventually it kind of took over. We started Afro Chic as a blog, just talking about design. And now, 16 years later, we're here.
Design was not natural for me. We did not have a good rapport early on. I always say that, you know, for me, if a room had four walls, someplace to sit, and a way to get out of it, that was as much design as I was ever looking for. So when we first moved to San Francisco and Jeannine was working as a lawyer and I was going to school, Jeannine, being one of those unhappy lawyers, just looking for these creative outlets and wanting to have conversations on design. And I just was not the conversation partner that I wanted to be. So at the time, blogs were taking off, the blogosphere was becoming a thing, and people were having these conversations online. And so I suggested that we start a blog so that she could find better people to have this conversation with, because I just wasn't holding up my end. I'm gonna be honest, at the time, I was really thinking this was gonna be my way out of the conversation. But instead, it turned out to be that I started learning more and understanding more. And at the time, I had gone from, originally I was at the Graduate Theological Union studying systematic philosophical theology, and had moved on to UC Berkeley for African diaspora studies. And at the time, I was looking at these very sort of obscure cultural artifacts, these small practices, and the ways that they could be used as lenses on the cultures that created them. And it was work that was interesting to me, but it was very difficult to translate to anyone else because you would have had to have had some understanding and knowledge of these practices in order to see how they functioned. But design, I started to realize, was a much larger door for people to go through. You know, it became a much clearer lens on history and culture, politics, all of the things that go into making even a momentary trend can be a question of like a changing of nations. Yeah. And so that, as we went and as Afro Chic developed, that became the point, my entry into design, and the way that it got deeper as we went from blogging about the presence and accomplishments of other designers to becoming designers and then authors and eventually interior designers ourselves.
I mean, one of the things about this particular look at design is you're focused on the homes of Black men and women. And it's not about celebrities or athletes or the uber wealthy. There are a lot of just sort of regular people in the book. I mean, why was it so important to not have, this be about like Oprah's house?
You want to start?
That's always the question, who gets to go first? One of the reasons that was so important to us is because when we first came up with the idea to do this second book and the idea of making it a house tour book, my first question was, well, how do we make it something that isn't just a design book of here are some people who have nice houses? And we knew that there were a lot of things we wanted to do, a lot of stories we wanted to tell. And more than anything else, we didn't want to create something that just had 16 Black people with nice homes in them, kind of because we didn't want to create the out of saying, okay, here are Black people with nice homes, racism is over, we can all go home. Like, there's nothing else we need to do. But one of the things we had to do was to create something that diversified our understanding of the Black experience. Because we knew that Black homes, when they are seen, tend to get classified in very narrow ways. So if we're looking at nice homes, then yes, you would expect to be looking at Oprah's house, LeBron's house, someone I've seen on television. If you're not looking at that, then typically you're looking at the inner city, the projects, the ghetto, that. And then that in-between space, was considered to be, well, just normal houses. So the idea that Black people's homes were just like white people's homes. And so we knew that there was something unique and special in the way that we were approaching design. We began to touch on it in our first book, Remix. And it was really a question of how to bring that out more clearly and in a way that, one, served to create that diversity of our apprehension of Black experience, but also that connected it to the larger narrative of the African American, what we started calling the African American journey to home.
Yeah, for me, it really came from, for years, Brian and I have been writing about design and homes. We've been writers for HGTV for many years. And right before we did this project, we had a house tour series where we went to all types of different homes all around the country. And it was actually in talking to a friend, we had featured a home in Brooklyn. It was an African-American man who lived there and had designed it. And our friend was from the Bronx and he was African-American. And he said, I'd never seen a house like that. Like, I didn't know Black people had houses like that. And we kind of stopped and we were like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? He's like, I've never seen like this townhome in Brooklyn. Like, I've seen that on TV, like Cosby Show or something like that, but not in reality. And so that kind of made us stop. Our family roots are in Philadelphia, where everyone has a home, everyone lives around the corner from each other. Going to an auntie's house or to a grandparent's house is not really seems special. And we realized that we kind of had lost this touchstone of that Black space. That home space was not really translating across, even for us as African Americans. And so what we wanted to show that there is value in our homes. There's value in our stories of homes. These spaces have been hard fought for. Many families had to go through refugee-like circumstances through the Great Migration coming up just to get that first home and then expanding, and that story is something that we shouldn't keep or not talk about, but it is this very special story. And we wanted to show that, yes, everyday people in our community have amazing spaces. These aren't interior designer spaces, many of them in the book. These are just people who have a wonderful aesthetic and are creating a space that tells their story and also a greater story of African Americans here in the United States.
One of the things that you had said earlier that I found so fascinating was when you asked people what home meant, and you asked the people in the book what home meant for them, that things like success and family were on the list, but at the very top was security and safety. And I thought that was so intriguing because just sort of in this moment, there have been so many stories of people, of Black people who have not been safe, even in their own homes. I mean, can you talk a little bit about, how that struck you and why you feel like people set safety at the very top of the list?
So with every interview, the book has 16 different homes in it. And with every interview, we did these Zooms where we would actually talk to folks for like an hour or 2 hours and do this involved questionnaire. Like, what was the first home you remember? And then we would end each interview by asking that question, what does the Black family home mean to you? And every single family said safety. That was every single family. And we didn't expect that, but we definitely had to think about why that was, like you said. And for many people, it was just that as African Americans, we go through microaggressions all day long, whether you're outside or you're watching television or, you're on social media, you are always you're always realizing that there is danger that's happening in terms of your life could be ended at any point, at any time. And that when people are coming home, it is like a release. I can close the door and for a minute, for an hour, for several hours, I can just be myself. I don't have to worry about what happens in the workplace or if I'm on public transit or if I walk by a police officer or whatever it is. I don't have to think about all these things. For just that moment, I can just be me. And that sense of safety and security was very much a sense of, for many people, is just a sense of freedom. That just for these small moments at home with family, we can actually truly let our hair down and be ourselves. Like you said, today, that's still, we've seen where, African Americans at home have not been safe. We can think about Breonna Taylor and that sense of safety where she was sleeping at home was actually violated. But I do understand it. I feel that way myself, that when I go home, for those times that I'm there, it does become a cocoon, almost like a womb away from all of the things that are outside.
And I think one of the things we realize is that when we say safety, and that is such our first answer, it's our first thought, you're right, we don't mean safety in the sense necessarily of physical security. Because as you said, Breonna Taylor can tell us that home is not necessarily safe. Botham Jean can tell us that, even Skip Gates can tell us that home is not necessarily a safe space, even when you are known and notable. And so the question becomes then, why do we feel safe there? And so as we were doing this, it became an intersection with this question and another that we were frequently asked. It was about the idea of African American design. Is there such a thing? And so as we started to think about how we could better classify and explain what an African American approach to design was, we centered not necessarily on specific elements of design like a color palette or furniture styles, but on 5 basic needs that design as a cultural artifact serves for African American people. Mm-hmm. And safety, of course, was number 1, followed by control, visibility, celebration, and memory. And so if home is not necessarily physically safe, then we begin to look to the others, control, the ability to make the decisions that I want to make in my space without having to fight for them, contend for them, defend the space once I've created it, once it's been won, tolerate microaggressions, be on call for teachable moments, endure white privilege, assuage white guilt, or be under the microscope of anything else that goes on in the course of the day. Visibility, that representation, the ability to, one person we spoke to one time, I don't think it wasn't a person who was in the book, but someone asked her when they came to her home why her home was full of Black art. And she said, every time I leave my house, I spend my entire day surrounded by images of not me. So when I come home, I want to look at not you. And so that ability to have that visibility. And then celebration, we add celebration to visibility with the understanding that the question of representation, as is generally put, is not a question only of when and where we're seen, but also how and why. So we can increase visibility in television, on stage plays, or any of the places, but if we're always seen within these narrow boundaries, reinforcing these same tropes, then that doesn't help. Now, are there people who are represented by a particular role in television or a particular reality TV show? Yes, of course there are. But we're also everything else.
Right.
And so if we limit ourselves and we allow ourselves to be limited to only these stories, then in the common knowledge and in sort of America's collective memory, then we become only those things. And that only tightens the noose of all of the things that we feel when we're not able to be at home. So celebration becomes important. And so memory, because of, since the book, the very good questions of some very good people that we've been talking to lately, we've been spending a lot of time looking at memory in particular as a cornerstone of the Black family home, and really understanding that it stands at the intersection of two different kinds of memory. There's the individual memory that we have as Black people in creating our homes, and then there's sort of America's national collective memory. And we're remembered in very different ways in the two of those things. So, in America's collective memory, we're thought of, when you think of things, welfare mothers, super predators, all of these different ideas and tropes that have been put out against us. And then at home, we have the ability and the freedom to remember ourselves, not so only centrally, because that's not good enough to center ourselves in a conversation, because what you don't want to do is become subjective in the opposite direction. You don't want to distort the story in your favor or misremember in ways that are inaccurate. But it's an ability not to see ourselves only as central, but really to see ourselves as we are.
Well, that's why I was really struck by, in several of the homes, that people have taken history and they have, sort of told the truth of the history, but also connected it to their present in a really sort of uplifting way. One that stands out was the woman who had created this sort of decorative cotton tree to reflect the time period when her family was enslaved and they had to pick cotton, to the point when they were sharecroppers, to the point where they then became landowners and were able to use cotton as a source for their own wealth. I mean, can you talk a little bit about the ways in which you saw people taking history and really sort of reclaiming it in full?
Yeah, I think that there were so many beautiful ways. That was Shauna Freeman. Her family had, been enslaved, been on a cotton plantation, then eventually became sharecroppers and eventually became able to buy that land. And cotton, she said, sent her and her siblings to college. She graduated from Princeton University. And so,
Sorry.
and so, yes, and so, being able, for her, that cotton tree represented, for me, it was uncomfortable. I actually remember seeing it at first and going like, ugh, because I feel like when I see that cotton plant, it gives me a negative feeling. But then when I heard her story, and she really revealed this whole story that we never hear much about, the African Americans who actually able to buy the land, which there are many stories of that, I understood. And it was that she was giving us all something and showing how her family had been able to build post-slavery, post-emancipation. So I do think that one of the things that's so special about these homes is how people do live with memories, how we live with the heirlooms, how we live with the past and not look at it as a negative. It actually strengthens us, knowing our history and where we came from. I mean, we came from, when emancipation happened, there was no Black family home. There were people who were free, and there were people people who had their own plantations. But for people who were actually enslaved on a plantation, once emancipation occurs, Black people are just basically sent off of these plantations that they had been and lived on, and basically have to invent and create home and community. So to remember that history and then to see where we are today, for me, it's fortifying. It makes me know that I'm from, a group of people that have been so strong and resilient over so many years. And I think that Shauna was able to keep that alive in her home. Arian, who's like right there, Arian and Darren, who are also both in the book, she is able to keep the memories of her grandmother alive in her home, and also has a beautiful framed piece of an ancestor who helped on the Underground Railroad, helped free hundreds of people. And being able to see those pieces in the home just gives us, it makes our homes meaningful. It makes our homes nurturing. It makes us, understand where we come from. And I think that there is that beauty of understanding and being connected to the history.
And again, that becomes one of those things where, combined with all these other elements, speaks to why we're able to feel safe at home. Because collectively, as opposed to other places that we may be, we have all of these things. We have all this ability. And we have the memories that we have there, both the memories that build the house, the memories that we create there, and then the memories that we pass on. So that when you do go out into the world and you're confronted with all of the sort of like narrow views of what you can be and who you can speak to that and say, when someone is telling you what you can't say, you can speak to that and go, well, I remember, James Baldwin said it. I remember that Toni Morrison said it. Frederick Douglass said it. And so in remembering that, not only do I remember that I have the ability to do as much, but I also have the responsibility to do no less. Because, and I think what we find with homes like that, and especially with Ariane's and Shauna's, is memory is important because essentially it becomes the basis of future expectation. So what has happened.
Wait, can you say that again? That was like really, that was really good.
I say memory is the basis of future expectation. So everything that you know or believe has happened becomes the basis for everything that you think can happen. So if you've been told that you've never been anywhere. So even, for example, when Janine is talking about in the first days of emancipation, or even before emancipation, formerly enslaved people who simply left while the conflict of the Civil War was going on. At first, when they reached northern lines, they were simply returned. And then eventually they were put into prison. And those prisons eventually became sort of like early, tenement buildings. And there's a way of looking at that history of these people are just being moved and shifted and sorted with no power or agency of their own. But when you really look at those stories, you see that they, despite all of the oppressions and paternalism and everything that was heaped on them, they formed, action groups within these places. They took up, they had meetings and they signed petitions and they spoke to the people who were managing. They fought for their rights and to be respected as homeowners, just as human beings. And so it's very important that we remember that level of agency that's always been a part of our history and has always been a part of our movement. It's important that we remember, as much as it's important that we remember Tulsa, Oklahoma, and what happened to it in 1921, it's important that we remember that there were 49 other black towns in Oklahoma at that time. And that at one point, Oklahoma actually petitioned to become an all-black state. Because now when we think about the way that housing has happened, the fact that we're at the lowest rates of housing that we've seen since the signing of the Fair Housing Act in 1968, and then when we look at the onslaught of gentrification, redlining, eminent domain, all of these weapons that are brought to bear against us, there's this, again, the question of common knowledge, this feeling that black people don't have agency over where we are or where we stay. And that's just a continuation of a historical narrative. Well, we've never really had any control. Because before now, black people were just slaves, and slaves have no say over anything. But when you actually know the story, when you know the history, you see the agency that people have shown over time, you remember that we have that ability, and we have that power, and we should be expressing that agency at all times.
I mean, that really gets at, the fact that often typically when you pick up a design magazine, it's not often that you see black homeowners in those magazines. And I think we sort of shrug it off as it's just eye candy. And it doesn't have sort of the depth of meaning that we might assign to other things. I mean, how important, you were getting at that just now. I mean, how important is it that in those just sort of moments of, aesthetics, that black homeowners are not erased from that?
I mean, the erasure has such an impact. In the conversations we've been having since this book was published, a lot of people, black and white, have told us we haven't seen homes like this, or, we haven't, that visibility is not there. We actually talked to one person who interviewed us and actually asked her, well, why do you think that black people don't live in the community you live in. And she said, I never really thought about it. I guess in the back of my mind, I thought Black people didn't want nice homes. And it was a very honest conversation. But at the same time, we realized that we are missing, that our stories are not told, really does create this sense of that we are either we don't want to be in nice homes or in nice communities, it's something that we have created for ourselves, or that we're just completely incapable of achieving such things. So it really does have real world consequences when magazines are not showing black homes, especially mainstream magazines that are supposed to be showing ideas of the American interior. It also hurts when our design books are not doing that as well. It's something that we've been working on just in writing books like this, but also in our work with our own magazine and also working with other publications about showing what America actually is, who America actually is. And if the Black family home isn't included in that story, then we're actually not getting a real picture of who we are as Americans.
And I think it's important that, as you said, it's not just Black homes, it's Black family homes, which is an expression of community, history, memory, so many more things than just a building with nice furniture in it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And when we look at the story, so one of the reasons why we constructed the book in the way that we did is because we knew that we had to make those connections. We wanted to make them clear. Because the more that we thought about them, the more we realized that this is not a conversation that we'd seen approached in this way. So we needed to look at this story from both sides. You know, usually when we're looking at Black families or when we're looking at Black experience, it's either Black suffering or Black joy in just one or the other. But we needed to be able to see the joy of the individual homes, but also to see the struggle of that journey from a distance of generations. And the reason that we did it was because it started to illustrate certain things that became very important to us. So for one, we talk about the Black family home as a missing character in the narrative of American history, because it is for exactly the same reasons that we just said. We're not seen in the magazines, we're not seen necessarily on television, we're not seen, there are not a number of academic studies looking at the Black family home or things of that nature. We're not viewed historically. As a matter of fact, in researching the book, a lot of the information initially that I was able to find about Black family homes over the years actually came from studies on homelessness, because Black people were more represented. And the one study that I found starts with a lament that there were not more studies on homeless Black people when so much of the homeless population is Black. So the reason what we started to find was that it wasn't simply a question of the social injustice of the absence of the Black family home, but that there are actually very strong, concrete, real-world economic and political reasons for that omission. One of the things that we really wanted to argue against was what we call the myth of happenstance. This idea that people will say, well, it just so happens that Black people don't have, or Black people don't want to live in my neighborhood, or it just so happens that Black people don't make as much money or have as much wealth. And to look at the fact that when you look at it historically, these are not accidents. These are the outcomes of very intentional actions. And so it became very important to look at that from a perspective of wealth. We talk about the wealth gap and the inheritance gap that happens in this country. And again, that brings us into contact with this idea of common knowledge. And so common knowledge will say, well, Black people don't have nice homes because there's an education gap, or because there's an income gap, or because of spending habits, or things like that. But there are a number of studies done by economists across a number of groups, like the New School, or even Congress has a number of studies that we've read as well. They really talk about the fact that education is not really an equalizer there, because the wealth gap between there's a wealth gap of about $50,000 between Black and white households on average, of households that are headed by high school dropouts. Between high school dropouts, there's a $50,000 gap. When you talk about people who have college degrees, there's a $300,000 gap in wealth between the average Black family and the average white family. And so you start to find out that what all of this is predicated on is what they call intergenerational wealth transfers. And a lot of that is made up in homes. Either a home is actually transferred in a will, someone inherits it, or someone is given enough money to be able to purchase their first home, and so they don't go into debt. Or, and often simply having your education paid for by your parents takes care of that level of debt that that would otherwise interfere with being able to purchase a home. So there are a lot of very, very tangible outcomes. There's a lot of very tangible reasons why the Black family home has been removed from this narrative, because it becomes, in the absence of the Black family home, you see the underpinnings of a number of American social myths and economic realities that translate into this enduring condition of inequality. So the congressional report that I was reading says that for the last 50 years, regardless of where the economy has been, Black people have experienced conditions that would be considered recessionary if they were extended to the entire country. So no matter how the rest of the country is doing, we're constantly working at a disadvantage. And the Black family home, in the absence of it in a narrative, is something that works to basically to both, justify and to normalize this condition. Because, as I said, it becomes common knowledge. Black people don't have homes like this. So you don't expect to see homes like this. And so all of these things, these conditions, whether you're talking about water in Flint, Michigan, or whether you're talking about, redlining or eminent domain or the removal of Black people after Hurricane Katrina, they just become the normal course of daily business for us.
So I want to save a couple minutes for questions, but so my last question is, I know you were working on this as sort of COVID was erupting. Did you find that the meaning for you of home changed in the pre-COVID and after?
Well, I mean, our whole lives changed with the pandemic. The meaning of home definitely changed for us. Before the pandemic hit, we never ever wanted to buy a house. Like we were definitely the people that, we lived in cities all of our life. We had gone to school in cities. We were like, home ownership, I don't want to be tied to a 30-year mortgage. That doesn't really make much sense. We just want to rent forever and, travel and go wherever we want to go. When the pandemic hit, we were living in Brooklyn, and just being in the city felt like almost like a fishbowl when lockdown occurred. I think a lot of us felt like if you didn't have New York to go out into, it was like, what, I'm paying like all this money, it doesn't really make sense. I actually saw in our neighborhood a lot of white people starting to move. And it was like in the very beginning of lockdown, and we would see U-Hauls coming in Brooklyn like every day, U-Hauls. And I would look out the window and I was like, Brian, the white people are moving. I was like, we gotta go. I was like, we're gonna get stuck. We're not gonna be able to get a house. We're gonna get stuck here. And I was like, I felt like this intense pressure, like we had to leave. So we started looking for a house, and we had never thought about doing that before. We called Restoration Plaza in Brooklyn, this great community center, and we were like, okay, we were thinking about buying a house and actually thought we would never be able to buy a house. I went to law school. I have a ton of debt. Brian has 2 master's degrees. He has debt. So, we were like, we're never gonna be able to buy a house. And this young African-American man guided us through the process that we didn't know about ourselves. And he was like, go just see if you can get pre-approved. And I was like, I'm not gonna get pre-approved, there's no way. And we actually went and did the pre-approval and we got pre-approved. And I was like, what? I didn't even think that was a possibility. Within a couple of months, we went and looked for houses. We got approved, and we were approved. We got our closing date, and it was like we ended up moving, like a lot of New York expats. And our home has been a space for us of healing, because during that process, at the same time that we were looking to move, I developed long COVID. So Brian had been one of the first COVID cases in New York, had double pneumonia, made it through 2 months of really almost dying. And while taking care of him, I had what seemed like a simple stomach ache, was like, oh, there's supposed to be a 24-hour stomach flu, you get in the city all the time. but then developed terrible allergies that basically I wear a mask now because anywhere I go, anything I do, I can just go into an anaphylactic attack. So being able to have home was very helpful for me to heal. I had to learn, I went through a point where my body completely decompensated. I had to learn how to walk again, how to talk again, how to eat again, how to go to the bathroom on my own again. I was like a child, a baby or a toddler. And having our space in which to reflect on what home meant, to be able to reflect on our ancestors, to be able to ask about family stories, and we wanted to learn more about what that process had been like for our families to come up north, and to be able to actually write this book, because my husband was taking care of me writing the book on his phone while I was basically trying to come back to life. And when I was able to kind of come back, I actually laid the entire book out in terms of the photography and laid out how you see it today. And that for me was an amazing moment of coming back into myself. So just being able to work on this book and think about home really gave me a lot of, again, that resilience. And I, the days when I was really in bad shape, I called on the ancestors. I thought a lot like what they had gone through. And I was like, if they could survive everything that Black people have survived in America and still love this country and still be citizens of this country and still fight for this country, then I could work my way back. So yeah, that nurturing space of home. Now I'm really proud to be a homeowner, and I love that we have a space that is ours, that is a cocoon. Again, that womb space that does feel secure.
Security.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think
Sorry, I'm just going to say, if anyone has questions, please move to the microphone, and I think we have a few minutes for them when someone walks to the microphone. Yes, please.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for being here. Just listening to your commentary about intergenerational wealth, that wealth transfer, home ownership. I think a piece of it too is the appraisal process. And would love to hear your thoughts or reactions to pathways for more equitable appraisal process for Black homeowners. Speaking about your book, I mean, you're talking about interiors, and piece of advice that a lot of Black homeowners are given would be to remove artwork, any type of paraphernalia, even have someone who is not Black sit in on the appraisal process as a witness. And what's your response to that? What's equity or what's equality for that? Are there any ways that we don't have to remove all of our interiors to get the money that we deserve for our homes?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell anybody not to do anything, if, because the inequality exists and the problem exists, and if that's the way that you choose to address it, then, I am not enough of an authority in that area to tell you to not do that. What I will say, though, is that very clearly is not equity, and it's not correct, and it's not right, and there's no reason why we should have to remove ourselves from our homes. Seeing homes be, appraised at lower value if Black people are living in them and trying to sell them, or at a higher value if Black people are trying to buy them so that we can move in. What is most important is to kind of see that for what it is and understand, the ways in which you have these interlocking, what we call kind of like spheres of oppression that are happening. And they exist largely to sort of give plausible deniability to each other. So that, if you don't see Black people in this neighborhood, then it's not because of what you're talking about, it's because of all of the other things we said were common knowledge. We need greater diversity in these areas. We need more Black appraisers. We need more Black real estate agents. We need to kind of remember, again, that there were these periods of very highly activist Black real estate people. So that's how we got a Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's how we got Harlem, was black people either buying land and saying, we're going to create this town, or, it's how we got, people buying up buildings and saying, I'm going to create space for black people in this area. And we do need to be able to work together to create more equity for each other. But we also need to work together to hold accountable all of these people and not simply let it go as if the worst thing we can ever say is that's just the way it is. One of the things that we learned in the process of writing this and thinking about these things is there's no such thing as the way it is. There's only the way we make it. Most of the way that the world is the way that human beings make it for each other. And so the more that we can work together and fight together for what it should be, the less we have to put up with what it is.
All right, we're going to try to squeeze in one more question because I got the 5-minute mark. Yes, please.
So my question is around interior design. I got the book. It's beautiful, frankly. But I noticed the pattern of culture and design in African American homes. Like there's more color. There's a lot more expression of art. And do you see that throughout the times that you've been looking in various homes and meeting with people, or do you think that's more of just a happenstance? Or
People definitely ask that a lot. One of the things we don't want to have happen is that the book becomes this idea of an aesthetic, like that there's like a black aesthetic. I actually think one of the things, and the reason why you see that is because there is no definitive black aesthetic in anything. Black people are about originality. That's what we value as a culture. Brian will always say, things like the crossover dribble or what you do in hip hop. I mean, happy birthday hip hop, 50 years. Right? It's really about your individuality, right? Like, everyone has their thing. And that's what we prize and we love about each other. So I do think you see that reflected in our homes, and that people will embrace the color because they like color. They'll, put up art because they like art. Like, no, in my aunt's house, like, you weren't going to tell her what she could do with it. It was what she wanted to do. I do think that we're not a culture that is about being prescriptive. And so a lot of that then is the freedom and the liberation in which we're approaching our spaces, not because someone has told us or because this magazine tells us what to do or, some design expert tells us what to do, but because it's how we feel and what we want to do in our space.
And that's why you see there are some homes in the book that are extremely colorful, they're extremely vibrant, and you have some that are done more in neutrals, simply because we wanted to make clear, again, that we have that diversity. We can go in any direction.
Okay, we're going to squeeze in one more question because I got it.
Hi, my name's Ishara. I have a question. What happens if somebody who's brown forgets who they are and their ancestry, because it is a rare disease, but it is real? What happens if they forget who they are and they forget their design style and everything, what they like in their ancestry? How do you fix what is broken?
Well,
That's a big question.
That's a big question. That's a really good question. And one of the
She's
things.
going to be working for the Washington Post.
Yes.
Oh, yes,
soon.
yes,
I promise.
yes. So, one of the things that we found as we started looking at African American design and starting with the question of how to define it, and realizing that it doesn't really conform to any of the ways that we would typically define the design style, these colors, this furniture, things like that. In order to really understand it, we had to start looking at it as a cultural artifact. We had to look at it as something that comes from our culture and something that contributes to our culture at the same time. And so because of that, we found that home can actually be a really good space for working out questions of identity. Learning how to design, learning how to, not to say, this is what I got from HGTV, or this is what this magazine told me, or this influencer, but going into a space and saying, how do I need to see myself reflected in this room? And so even we've talked about Shauna Freeman a couple of times, and Shauna, when she got her house, she said she went to one room on her second floor and said, I don't know what I'm going to do in here, but whatever I do, if it's bad, I can just close the door because I don't come up here often. Right? And she decorated this amazing kind of girl cave in this all hot pink, and it was so good that it inspired her to do the next room and the next room and the next room until she was all the way done. And that was a place where she could begin to work through those things and work out these ideas and come into sort of the freedom of being herself and expressing herself in her four walls.
I'm afraid the buzzer has gone off on our conversation, but I do want to tell everyone to please head over to Janine and Brian's book signing. It's from 7 to 8 p.m. in Hall DE in the North Building. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Robin.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much.